The coffee shop buzzed with the hum of conversation, the clink of cups, and the faint hiss of the espresso machine. Ethan sat at a corner table, his fingers drumming restlessly against the edge of his laptop. The screen glowed with numbers, spreadsheets, projections, and a business plan that had consumed his every waking moment for the past 3 years. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, and his hair slightly disheveled, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. A determination that had been forged in the fire of heartbreak. Across from him, Claire stirred her latte absently, her gaze flickering between him and the window. She looked different, softer, somehow. Her once perfectly styled hair fell in loose waves, and her makeup was minimal, almost natural. But it wasn't just her appearance. There was a hesitance in her movements, a vulnerability that Ethan hadn't seen in years. Not since the day she'd walked out of his life. "So," she began, her voice tentative, "you've really made something of yourself, huh?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I had to. No one was going to do it for me." Claire's lips pressed into a thin line, and she looked down at her cup. "I always knew you had it in you. You were always so driven." "Funny," he said, his tone dry, "that's not what you said when you left." She flinched, her fingers tightening around the handle of her mug. "Ethan, You wanted a better life," he interrupted, his voice steady but laced with an edge. "You made that clear. And now here we are." Her cheeks flushed, and she glanced around the cafe as if searching for an escape. "I didn't come here to fight. I wanted to see you. To talk." "Talk about what?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. "About how you're doing. About how he's doing. Or maybe you just want to see if I'm still the same guy you walked away from." Claire's eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked like she might cry. But then she straightened her shoulders, her chin lifting defiantly. "I made a mistake, okay? I was young, and I was scared, and I thought I needed something more. But I was wrong." Ethan studied her for a long moment, his gaze piercing. "And now?" "Now," she hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Now I realize what I lost." The air between them grew heavy, charged with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. Ethan's jaw tightened, and he looked away, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for an answer. But there was no answer, just the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. "It's too late, Claire," he said finally, his voice low but firm. "I've moved on." Her breath caught, and she reached across the table, her hand hovering over his before pulling back. "Ethan, please. Just, give me a chance to explain." He shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You had your chance. 3 years ago. And you chose someone else." "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "But people change. I've changed." Ethan's phone buzzed on the table, and he glanced at the screen. A photo of a woman with warm brown eyes and a radiant smile lit up the display. He picked it up, his expression softening as he read the message. "Who's that?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "My fiancé," he replied, his tone matter-of-fact. Claire's face fell, and she leaned back in her chair as if the wind had been knocked out of her. "Oh." Ethan stood, slipping his phone into his pocket. "I have to go. She's waiting for me." Claire nodded numbly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Of course." He hesitated for a moment, looking down at her with a mixture of pity and resolve. "Take care of yourself, Claire." As he turned to leave, she reached out again, her fingers brushing against his arm. "Ethan, wait." He paused but didn't turn around. "What is it?" I need you to know that I'm sorry. For everything." Ethan exhaled slowly, his shoulders tense. "I know." And with that, he walked away, leaving Claire sitting alone at the table, her latte growing cold in front of her. Outside, the city bustled with life, cars honking, people rushing by, the sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Ethan pulled out his phone again, his thumb hovering over the screen as he typed out a quick reply to his fiancée. On my way. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and started walking, his steps brisk and purposeful. But as he turned the corner, he couldn't shake the image of Claire's face, her wide eyes, her trembling lips, the raw emotion in her voice. It wasn't until he reached his car that he allowed himself to pause, leaning against the door for a moment as he took a deep breath. The past had a way of catching up with you, no matter how far you ran. And now, it was staring him right in the face. But he wasn't the same man he'd been 3 years ago. He was stronger now. Smarter. And he had someone who believed in him, someone who had stood by him when he had nothing. As he slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what Claire had expected when she reached out to him. Did she think he'd fall back into her arms? That he'd forget everything she'd done? He shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips as he pulled out into traffic. Some things were better left in the past. But as he drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not yet. Claire watched him go from the window of the cafe, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't expected it to be easy, but she hadn't expected it to hurt this much either. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through her contacts. There was only one person she could talk to right now, one person who would understand. Hey, she said when the call connected, her voice shaky. I need your help. On the other end of the line, a familiar voice replied, calm and steady. What happened? Claire took a deep breath, her eyes still fixed on the spot where Ethan had disappeared. I saw him. There was a pause, and then, he's engaged. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, the voice spoke again, softer this time. What are you going to do? Claire bit her lip, her mind racing. I don't know yet. But I can't just let him go. Not again. The voice sighed, heavy with concern. Be careful, Claire. You're playing with fire. She nodded, even though no one could see her. I know. As she ended the call and slipped her phone back into her purse, Claire felt a strange sense of determination settle over her. She wasn't going to give up, not this time. Ethan might have moved on, but she wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. Ethan's mind was a storm as he drove to his fiancée's apartment. Claire's words echoed in his head, her voice soft but insistent, like a ghost he couldn't shake. I made a mistake. I regret it every day. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles whitening. The memory of her face, those wide, pleading eyes, the way her lips had trembled, was etched into his thoughts. But so was the image of his fiancée, waiting for him, her smile warm and steady, her presence a balm to his restless soul. He parked outside the building and took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The elevator ride felt endless, each floor ticking by with agonizing slowness. When he finally reached her door, he hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the knob. Then he turned it and stepped inside. She was there, sitting on the couch with a book in her hands, her hair loose and falling in soft waves over her shoulders. She looked up at him, her eyes lighting up with that familiar warmth. Hey, she said, her voice soft and inviting. You're early. Ethan didn't respond right away. He crossed the room in a few quick strides, his heart pounding in his chest. Before she could say another word, he was beside her, his hands cupping her face as he kissed her with a sudden, almost desperate intensity. Her lips parted in surprise, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. His kiss deepened, his tongue brushing against hers as his hands slid down to her waist, pulling her closer. She let out a soft sigh, her body melting against his. Ethan's fingers found the zipper of her dress, and he tugged it down slowly, the sound of it echoing in the quiet room. The fabric fell away, revealing the smooth curve of her back, the delicate straps of her bra. Her breath quickened as his lips left hers and trailed down her neck, his teeth grazing her skin just enough to make her shiver. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What's gotten into you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pressed his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. "I need you," he murmured, his voice low and rough. I need you." She reached up, her fingers brushing against his cheek. "You have me," she said softly. "You've always had me." Ethan closed his eyes, letting her words sink in. For a moment, he let himself forget about Claire, about the past, about everything that had been weighing on him. All that mattered was here, now, this woman who had stood by him when he had nothing, who had believed in him when no one else did. But even as he held her, even as he kissed her again, softer this time, more tenderly, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was a tension in the air, a quiet unease that neither of them acknowledged. His fiancée seemed to sense it too. She pulled back slightly, her eyes searching his. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her brow furrowing with concern. Ethan hesitated. He wanted to tell her about Claire, about the meeting at the coffee shop, about the way it had stirred up emotions he thought he'd buried long ago. But the words caught in his throat. Instead, he forced a smile and nodded. "Yeah," he said. "Everything's fine." She studied him for a moment longer, as if she didn't quite believe him. But then she smiled back, her hand resting on his chest. "Good," she said. "Because I've got you, and I'm not letting go." Her words should have comforted him, but they only made the knot in his stomach tighten. He kissed her again, trying to push the thoughts away, but they lingered at the edges of his mind, stubborn and unrelenting. As they sat there together, her head resting on his shoulder, Ethan couldn't help but wonder if he was making a mistake. He loved his fiancée, he truly did, but Claire's reappearance had stirred something in him, something he wasn't sure he could ignore. "Do you ever think about the past?" he asked suddenly, his voice quiet. She lifted her head to look at him, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But not in a way that makes me want to go back." "Why? Are you thinking about it?" Ethan hesitated again. "Maybe," he said finally. "Just wondering if I made the right choices." She reached up, her fingers brushing against his cheek again. "You did," she said firmly. "We did. We're here now, together. That's what matters." He nodded, but the doubt remained. As much as he wanted to believe her, as much as he wanted to let go of the past and focus on the future, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. And then there was Claire, Claire with her soft eyes and her trembling lips, Claire who had once been everything to him. She was still out there, still waiting, still hoping. Ethan sighed and pulled his fiancée closer, burying his face in her hair. He didn't know what to do, didn't know how to reconcile the conflicting emotions warring inside him. All he knew was that he couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. "I love you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I love you too," she replied, her arms tightening around him. But even as they held each other, even as they whispered words of love and reassurance, the tension between them remained, a quiet undercurrent that neither of them could ignore. And somewhere, deep down, Ethan knew that things were about to change.